So the if is very, very powerful formula in Excel, and you can use it in all sorts of different ways. And the COUNTIF and SUMIF and AVERAGEIF functions are special cases of the general if. You could implement with nested functions using COUNTINF the function COUNTIF. We're not going to do that here, but you could if you wanted to. To illustrate the what if is a bit further, let's take a look at this diagram in PowerPoint. So C2 is the name of the cell that we are comparing. So let's say if C2 is equal to 0. If this is true, you go down here and you get 0. And if it is false, you go down this side and you get non-zero. So it's basically branches you into two scenarios. And you can use it in any which way you like. And if you start using Excel, there'll be lots and lots and lots of opportunities to use it. So let's do a few more examples of the kind of things you would normally come across working with Excel. Let's say you have another list of numbers. And another list. And we populate these with numbers. So let's do just some random numbers would be fine, I think. So let's do rand between with 1 and 100. And remember, you can always drag a formula. In this case, none of the cells will change because you don't reference any cells. So when you drag, you don't have to worry about referencing because you're not referencing any cells. And you drag it down. Oh, sorry. And you drag it down this way. And let's just copy and paste the values back just so the numbers don't change every time we do anything. Another way to do the pasting is after you've pasted, there's a control box that pops up. You can go in and hit values. So now we have just the values here. So let's go in now and change some of the values to some text, right? So I'll just write text. And here as well, in this column, let's write some text. And some text. Okay. Now let's add a column called sum here, where we just sum these two numbers using the sum function. So we go here and we comma and add the other one. Now this is relatively reference, and that will work out nicely when we drag it all the way down. So now you have all of these relatively reference cells. So one thing to note here is what has happened if you had text. Now the sum function is intelligent enough to understand that if there is a text, to not use it and just to use the numbers. So what it has done here is when it's 14, it's just listed the sum as 14 and ignore the text. Over up here, it has added both of these numbers, and therefore all the text ones have been ignored. 39 is just translated 39 here. 76 down here is just translated to 76. But let's use a dumber formula. Let's just use the plus sign to add them. So in order to do that, we use this cell and the plus sign or the plus symbol here, and then this one, and we hit enter. Again, this is relatively referenced, so we can just drag down and everything will update. But now you have some errors because this plus sign is not intelligent enough to differentiate between text and number, so it tries to add a text to a number and gets an error, which is a value error here. Imagine if we didn't have the sum function and we had to figure out a way to just ignore the text using the plus sign. So we could do that using the if statement. So if we go in here, we can write if, and there's a function in Excel called isError. IsError, you can see this here. So we use the isError and we say, we can go in here, write if isError, and now what the isError will do is it will compare if the value that we're getting is in fact an error or if it's not an error. So the way to do that is you write your formula inside of isError. So you write 61 plus 93. So if this turns out to be true, then you just want to ignore it, and we can just write ignore. And if it's not true, you just want it to compute the addition and present it. So we can do that by writing the formula again. And we get 154. Now let's drag it down, and we get ignores where the value error was. So let's take a look at what we did in this formula. It's a more complex formula. This is what is called the nested formula. Now, the first part of the if statement should produce a true or a false. That's what a conditional is, and that is very important that it does that. So it must produce a true and a false. The isError function does in fact produce a true or a false, which can be seen here. If I write just isError and then do the same addition as before, I get a false because it is not an error. If I go down and drag it all the way down, every time there's an ignore here, we get a corresponding true, and every time there is not a number here, we get a corresponding false. So the isError function does produce a true or a false. So again, so now if this has produced a true, then just write ignore. So let's take a look at what has happened down here in where we have ignore. We did this addition here, and the value of isError over I4 plus J4 was true, which can be seen over here. This is a true. So it used the ignore. In the cell above it, where it's adding I3 and J3, it was a false. So it skipped over the ignore and recalculated I3 plus J3 and produced the correct value. So, I hope this is evident in how all of this is working. It is very important, the if function, and it really becomes your cornerstone when you're using Excel in order to do different things, and do different things based on a certain result. The other thing to pay attention here is that we have a nested function here. Now, nested functions are interesting. It is important to look at how they work. So when a nested function is encountered by Excel, Excel will do what is called lazy evaluation, where it will only evaluate the function where it's required. So it goes in, evaluates the if. So if says evaluate the conditional. So it goes in and evaluates this conditional. If this conditional turns out to be true, it just prints ignore. And this expression here, I2 plus J2, never gets evaluated. As opposed to if this turned out to be false, then I2 and J2 will also get evaluated. Just a little thing to keep in mind, it does come in useful a lot of times to know this little fact of how evaluation works. Let me repeat that one more time. It's just it evaluates when something is needed to be evaluated. So for the if statement, it evaluates the conditional because it's necessary to evaluate the conditional every time. So if this conditional gives a true, it prints ignore and does not evaluate the false part of it, or the false value. But if it gives a false, then it goes ahead and evaluates the false value as well. And you can nest multiple functions depending on the functionality you want, but they'll always follow these rules of evaluation.